In this screencast, we're going to focus on the continued discussion of how to do more complex language searches with Logos Bible software. In a prior screencast, I focused on how to find words in close proximity to one another. In this screencast, we're going to focus on agreement. How do you find words that share a particular morphological feature? And in order to do that, we're going to have to introduce syntax searches within Logos. I am assuming that you know how to do basic lemma and morphology searches, how to look for a particular word or a particular grammatical feature. If you don't, you can go to the DTS YouTube channel and look at our Logos training playlist, and you'll see there towards the bottom a screencast that I did on lemma and morphology searches, and that'll get you up to speed on some of the basics. Before we dive in, I want to focus on the concept of agreement and what that means, and then Logos' approach to syntax searches. Agreement is very simple. It's another word would be concord, and it means that words share a particular grammatical feature. For example, in both Hebrew and Greek, nouns and adjectives can have gender, and concord would mean that in Greek, a noun and an adjective share the same gender, or in Hebrew, the same basic situation would apply. So we're basically talking about the rule of concord and how we would do a search grammatically to show that information. Now, as far as Logos' approach to syntax is concerned, think about the arrangement of a text on a spectrum. On one end, you have words and their constituent letters and what those mean in terms of morphology or lexeme. On the other end, you have an entire paragraph, for example, and how the clauses hang together to make that paragraph. Logos has actually been fairly good on both of those ends of the spectrum. For example, it's fairly easy to search for lemmas and morphological categories, and with some of their syntax materials, they have focused a lot on the function of the clause and how that works within the paragraph. But very often in biblical studies, where we live is in the middle. We want to find different types of words in close proximity to one another, or words that share grammatical features close to one another, and Logos is not very strong yet in that particular area. That's the space where we live, and so the purpose of this screencast is to help in that regard. But in order to do that, we have to use some of the syntax features in Logos. So keep in mind, what Logos means for syntax is oftentimes what we might call discourse linguistics or discourse concepts. And we're going to use these resources not really for those purposes, but for our morphological and proximity purposes a little bit more on the level of the clause. Before we start searching in the Hebrew text, I want to explain briefly to you the resources we're going to use to help us find words that are in agreement with one another. Logos has several resources that have been developed by two different scholars, and they fall under the name Anderson-Forbes. You can see on the left I'm showing the Anderson-Forbes phrase marker analysis, and then on the right the Anderson-Forbes analyzed text. These are essentially the same text, but they've been organized a little bit differently, and they'll illustrate a couple of principles. But the long and short is, this particular resource is a syntactical analysis of the clauses within the biblical text. Each clause and phrase has been analyzed as to its function. But for our purposes, it actually also includes the morphology of the particular words, which means we can use it to find words that are in agreement with one another. But it is important to understand the basic arrangement of this database. If you look at the text on the left, what you'll notice is that the words of the Hebrew Bible are arranged vertically. They run from top to bottom, as opposed to left to right, or right to left. And then you can see that branching off horizontally are the different classifications and structures that are part of the assessment of what this database is doing. But it's very important to recognize this from the outset. Because of the way the database has been conceived, that affects the way that we have to build our search in the search window that I'm going to show you in a minute. Now you'll notice on the right we have the Anderson-Forbes analyzed text, which is essentially the Hebrew Bible with the information underneath it. So the text is running horizontally like we would expect, but you can still access some of the basics. But it's important to understand the way these are conceived in order to understand how I'm going to build the searches, which is what I'll move to next. To get started with this search, I need to open up a search window, and I need to specifically pick syntax. And then I'll need to pick the Anderson-Forbes phrase marker analysis dataset. That's the database that will allow us to search the Hebrew Bible. We're going to start a new syntax search by going to Query, and then clicking New Syntax Search. And in this window, we'll actually build out the particular visual items that we want. I'm going to add a search term by clicking here, and I'm going to pick segment. In this nomenclature, segment equals a word. And so if you want to find words that are near each other or that have agreement, this is what you would choose. I can then go over here to the right and pick particular information about this word that I want. For example, let's imagine that I want to find a noun, and for reasons that will not need to be explained here, pick common. And you'll notice that I've now specified that I want to find a common noun as opposed to a proper noun in the biblical text. But let's imagine that I don't only want to find that. Let's imagine that I want to find an adjective as well that agrees in gender and number. What I'll need to do is to go back to this little segment and click the arrow on the bottom. Remember that this text is organized vertically, which means that the words that are next to each other are not left to right or right to left. They are up and down. They are vertical. So by clicking here and picking segment, what I'm now going to do is to describe what I want the very next word in the text to look like. And so here, let's pick part of speech, and let's pick noun, and then under noun family, we'll pick adjective. And so now you can see that I have a search which is going to find a noun followed immediately by an adjective in the Hebrew text. As I search, you can see that it will find that fairly quickly. Now let's imagine that we want to have these words not just be in order, but in agreement. We want the gender and number to be exactly the same. What I will do is to pick the second term, which is going to be my adjective, and now I'm going to include some agreement rules. I can add a rule in which the gender agrees with segment 1, and then I can add another rule where the number agrees with segment 1. What this search will do is find a noun followed by an adjective that agrees with it in gender and number. So let's hit the search, and you can see that those examples are found relatively quickly. But now let's imagine that we want to do this search with a word in between these words. We still want to maintain the agreement, but we want to allow that there could be perhaps an article or some other term in between. In other words, we may want these words to be in proximity to one another and show agreement, but we want to allow for something in between. Remember that this text is organized vertically, and so these are two words that are right next to each other in the Hebrew text. If I want to allow for something in between them, I'll need to go and add something in between by clicking on this particular arrow. Now you'll notice that I can add a particular word, I can add clauses. What I think is helpful is to add the anything box. What this does is it does not specify what part of speech it is, what particular word it is. It just allows for the fact that there may be words in between. And then I can specify over here by going to the General tab the number of times that it may occur. And this is basically the equivalent of a proximity operator. So let's keep this fairly tight. Let's go from 0 to 3 times. And this will allow for any word to occur between the noun and the adjective that agrees with it in gender and number, either no occurrences or up to 3 occurrences in between. And so when I execute this search, what you'll notice is that it finds nouns and adjectives together, and now there are words that are allowed to come between. And you'll also notice that the agreement is maintained. We did not change that. So this is a noun followed by an adjective that agrees with it in gender and number, allowing for various words to show up in between. Working with the New Testament is very similar to what we've done with the Hebrew text. We have to use a different resource, obviously, but the procedure is very much the same. The resource we use is the Cascadia Syntax Graphs of the New Testament. This is a resource developed by the Asia Bible Society that focuses on clausal analysis. But it's helpful for us because it will also focus on word agreement because it does have morphological information in it, just as the Anderson-Forbes database did. So we'll start a new query and a new syntax search. And what I want to find to illustrate this for you is a very strictly defined first attributive position. First attributive position is article, adjective, noun, in which all agree in gender, case, and number. And so it's a pretty simple affair of putting in my 3 words as they'll show up in the text, and then I'm going to specify what each word is going to be. What you'll notice that I did is I put 3 words together in the text in the order article, adjective, noun. But with a first attributive position, they have to agree in gender, case, and number. So now what I'm going to do is to add agreement rules so that the article and the adjective both agree with the noun in gender, case, and number. Now what you'll see I've done is I've set up the search so that it will find article, then adjective, then noun, and it will find every case where the article and the adjective agree with the noun in gender, case, and number. And there you have it, a very strictly defined example of the first attributive position within the New Testament where the words occur right next to one another. Now, again, if I wanted to, I could change this search so that there was an allowance for words in between by using the anything option, but I won't do that for the purposes of the screencast, but that illustrates the point that you could do that if you wanted to. Long and short is that in order to do these types of searches with agreement, you have to use the syntax search, and it's a little bit complicated to set up, but the key thing is to remember that these searches run vertically, because the databases are organized vertically, so to speak, and then you can add segments, add words, and adjust their parameters as needed to find the information that you're looking for.